You're standing in one of the busiest airports in America. The energy is electric, announcements echoing overhead, wheels clacking against tile, families reuniting, business travelers sipping their last sip of airport coffee before boarding. It's a scene that feels like motion itself. Every second, someone's story takes flight. But for one girl, her story is about to be ripped from the skies and thrown into the harshest spotlight imaginable. 17-year-old Arielle Jackson, a brilliant student from Seattle with a full scholarship to MIT's elite summer program, stood tall at Gate 27 at LAX, holding a first-class boarding pass, her ID, and a smile full of dreams. Her sweatshirt read, "Future Engineer," and her eyes sparkled with the kind of excitement you only see in someone who knows their life is about to change forever. What happened next? Changed everything. Without warning. Without reason. Without a single question asked. She was handcuffed. Dragged away like a criminal. Right there. In front of hundreds of strangers. Her only crime? Being a black teen girl who didn't look the part, to a bitter gate agent with too much authority and too little compassion. But here's the twist. The girl they wrongfully humiliated? The young woman they judged without a second thought? She wasn't just anyone. She was the daughter of the man who owns the entire airline. Yeah, let that sink in. Because the very moment those cold steel cuffs locked around Arielle's wrists, they weren't just dehumanizing a child. They were insulting the CEO of Liberty Wings Air. And when he found out what happened to his daughter, let's just say, Karen made the wrong call that day. This is a story of prejudice, power, and brutal karma. Of a young girl's dignity stripped, and then restored in front of the entire world. Of what happens when the system is exposed. And justice, for once, lands like a 747. You're not just going to hear about this story. You're going to feel it. Now buckle up. This one's about to take off. Just 12 hours earlier, Arielle Jackson had woken up before dawn, her heart pounding with excitement. She wasn't nervous. No, this was something bigger, something brighter. It was the electric buzz you feel when your life is about to level up. Her suitcase sat by the front door, packed 3 days in advance. Her favorite hoodie was folded neatly on top, Liberty High Robotics Club. Underneath that, a custom leather-bound journal her dad had given her when she was 10. She filled it with sketches of drone wings, propulsion diagrams, notes about solar lift ratios. The thing looked like it belonged in an aerospace lab, not a teenager's backpack. She was 17, but she'd already done more math than most people do in their 20s. And now, she was headed to MIT's Advanced Youth Robotics program. 6 weeks of workshops, lab tours, mentorship from actual engineers. Just getting accepted was nearly impossible. Full scholarship? Even rarer. Her mom, Simone, made a big breakfast. Eggs, toast, turkey bacon, and Arielle's favorite, banana pancakes with way too much syrup. Her dad, Ethan Jackson, CEO of Liberty Wings Air, was already at work. But he'd left her a note on the kitchen counter. It said, "First-class brain. First-class seat. Don't let anyone tell you where you belong. Proud of you always. Dad." It was the kind of message that makes your chest tighten for all the right reasons. The ride to Seattle, Tacoma International Airport was calm. Simone drove, humming to an old Anita Baker song, while Arielle sat in the passenger seat, watching planes lift off through the fog. She wasn't nervous. This wasn't her first flight. She'd grown up in airports, hung around hangars, sat in cockpits while her dad ran inspections. Flying was in her blood. At TSA, things went smoothly. She showed her boarding pass, first class, Liberty Wings Flight 308 to Boston, and her driver's license. The agent smiled, complimented her MIT hoodie, and waved her through. She reached her gate, Gate 27, at LAX around 10:45 a.m. after her connecting flight from Seattle. She had an hour to spare before boarding. She took a seat by the window and pulled out her journal, flipping to a sketch of a new quad-prop drone she'd been perfecting. Outside, a massive Liberty Wings 787 Dreamliner shimmered in the Southern California sunlight, fueling up for the long flight east. Arielle looked around. Passengers bustled by with their carry-ons and coffees, kids tugged on parents' hands, and flight announcements echoed overhead. She slipped in her earbuds and queued up a playlist. Mostly Kendrick, some her, a little Hans Zimmer for that movie score energy. She closed her eyes for just a second. And when she opened them, A woman with a tight blonde bun and a clipped expression had taken position behind the podium. Her name tag read Karen W. Gate Agent. Liberty Wings Air. Arielle felt a chill, but she didn't know why. Maybe it was just the cold AC. Maybe it was nothing at all. She didn't know it yet, but this woman wasn't just going to scan her ticket. She was going to try to erase her place on that plane entirely. And everything Arielle had worked for, all the dreams packed into that leather-bound journal, were about to be dragged across the terminal floor. Because sometimes, it's not turbulence in the air that ruins a flight. It's the kind that walks on two legs, holding a badge, and thinks they can decide who belongs where. The boarding announcement crackled through the loudspeakers, crisp and routine. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now begin boarding Flight 308 to Boston, starting with our first-class passengers. Please have your boarding passes and IDs ready. Arielle unplugged her earbuds, tucking them neatly into her hoodie pocket. She took a deep breath, smoothed her curls, and stood up. She clutched her passport and first-class ticket in one hand, her journal tucked under the other arm. She joined the short first-class line, standing behind a middle-aged businessman in a tailored navy suit who didn't even glance at her. Ahead, a mother and son, both white, were laughing about something the boy said. Arielle smiled quietly to herself. The moment felt surreal. She was doing it. She was boarding that flight. Her flight. But the moment she stepped forward and extended her boarding pass, she saw it. That pause. That flicker in the gate agent's eyes. Karen W. barely glanced at the paper before her lips tightened into a line. She took the ID slowly, as if it had germs. Then she looked back at Arielle. Top to bottom. Pause. Double take. Her eyes narrowed. Arielle tilted her head slightly, unsure. Is something wrong? She asked, her voice calm, polite, but with just a hint of unease. Karen didn't answer. Instead, she turned to her monitor and began typing with quick, sharp strokes. The screen blinked. She typed more. Arielle tried to glance at what she was doing, but the angle made it impossible to see. I'm just verifying something, Karen finally said, not looking up. Verifying what? Arielle asked, the nervous flutter in her chest starting to build. Karen exhaled sharply, loud enough to be heard by the people behind them. It's unusual, she said. This is a first-class ticket, purchased under the name Ethan Jackson. But you are not Ethan Jackson. No, Arielle said, trying not to sound defensive. I'm his daughter. He booked it for me. Same last name. You can see it matches my ID. Karen stared at her again, this time with something else in her eyes. Not confusion, not suspicion, but something colder, like she'd already made up her mind. We've had a lot of fraud lately, Karen said, her voice louder now. Teens using someone else's cards. First-class seats aren't cheap. A few people in line behind Arielle shifted uncomfortably. A man 2 rows back craned his neck to see what the holdup was. Arielle felt her throat tighten. Ma'am, she said, still trying to stay composed, I assure you, everything here is legitimate. I'm traveling to Boston for a program. You can call my father. He's the CEO of this airline. Karen gave a laugh. Not loud, but sharp. Of course he is. And just like that, she picked up her phone. Security, she said, glancing at Arielle with that same thin smile. I need officers at gate 27. Possible fraudulent passenger. First class. Female. Black. 17. Using a ticket not under her name. Arielle's heart dropped. Her hands started to tremble. The business traveler who had been ahead of her now stepped aside, awkwardly pretending not to notice. The mom with the little boy clutched her son's hand tighter. Passengers watched. Some whispered. Most just stared. No one spoke up. Karen hung up the phone and folded her arms. You'll need to step aside while we sort this out, she said. Arielle opened her mouth to protest, but stopped. Her voice wouldn't come out. Her mind was still trying to process what just happened. She had all the right documents, all the proof she needed, but none of it mattered. Not her ID, not her name, not her intelligence, not even the fact that her father owned the very airline she was being blocked from boarding. Because at that moment, to Karen, She wasn't a student. She wasn't a daughter. She was just a problem that didn't fit her image of who belonged in seat 2A. And soon, the security guards would arrive. With cuffs in hand, Arielle stood frozen. Her fingers clutched the edge of her boarding pass so tightly it crumpled between her palms. Her backpack, with everything she needed for the next 6 weeks, her laptop, her journal, her future, hung off one shoulder like a forgotten thought. She glanced around. People were watching her now, not out of concern, not out of curiosity, but with that same guarded look you see when someone pulls a fire alarm in a crowded theater. As if she was dangerous. As if she'd done something. Karen leaned her weight on the counter, calm and smug, like she'd just won a game no one else knew they were playing. And then, they arrived. 2 airport security officers in dark uniforms. 1 male, 1 female. They moved quickly, weaving through the gate crowd with purpose. The male officer was tall, built like a linebacker. The woman had a stern, fixed expression that looked like it hadn't cracked a smile in years. Karen waved them over. "This is her," she said, pointing at Arielle like she was a loose bag left on the concourse. "Fake first-class ticket. Possibly stolen identity. She claimed her father is Ethan Jackson." The name hung there. Ethan Jackson. It should have given them pause. Should have at least raised an eyebrow. It didn't. The officers didn't even blink. The female officer stepped forward. "Miss, can I see your ID?" Arielle handed it over with trembling hands. Driver's license. Boarding pass. MIT acceptance letter tucked behind. The officer glanced at the ID, then at her. "Where did you get this ticket?" she asked. "My father booked it for me," Arielle said. "He's the CEO of this airline. His name is Ethan Jackson. You can call." "We're not calling anyone right now," the male officer interrupted. "We need you to come with us." "Come with you," Arielle repeated, her voice cracking. "For what? What did I do?" "You're being non-compliant," the woman snapped. "We're asking you to step aside while we verify your identity." "But I just gave you my ID. You can scan the ticket. Look at the name. It matches." "That's enough," the man said. He stepped in closer. Way too close. She took a step back. Instinct. And that was all it took. "Turn around," the officer ordered. "What? No, wait. I didn't do anything." He grabbed her wrist. It was fast. Brutal. The female officer yanked her arm behind her back while the male officer pushed her forward. Her journal fell. Pages of drone sketches scattered across the floor like feathers in a windstorm. Someone gasped. Someone else pulled out a phone. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed across gate 27 like a gunshot. It silenced the crowd. Arielle was now bent over the podium, her cheek pressed against the cold laminate surface where minutes ago she tried to check in. Her eyes burned. Her chest heaved. She could hardly breathe. And still, Karen smirked. Still, no one helped. "You can't do this," Arielle cried. "I didn't do anything. I have a ticket. That's my name. Call my father. Just call my father." But they didn't. The male officer muttered something into his radio. The woman stood behind Arielle like a stone wall, hand resting on her taser. Passengers watched. Silent. Some whispered. A few looked away, pretending they didn't see. A couple filmed from behind bags or seats, but no one stepped forward. No one said, "This isn't right." No one said, "She's just a kid." The humiliation wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow, paralyzing, like drowning in the middle of a crowd who thought you deserved it. Arielle could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Her legs shook. Her hoodie slipped off one shoulder, exposing a corner of her MIT robotics tee. That tiny glimpse, the symbol of everything she'd earned, everything she'd worked for, only made it worse. Because no one cared. Karen picked up Arielle's fallen journal, flipped through it like it was some cheap notebook, then tossed it aside. "She's getting agitated," Karen said to the officers. "I'd recommend moving her before she makes a scene." Agitated? She had been calm. She had been polite. She had said "ma'am" and "please." But none of that mattered. Not to Karen. Not to the officers. Not to the people who chose silence over justice. They didn't see a future engineer. They saw a problem in a hoodie. And in the back of her mind, as they dragged her away, arms cuffed, eyes wet, knees weak, Arielle remembered something her dad always said. In first class or coach, you carry your name with you. But in that moment, it felt like her name had been stolen, too. It took one text. Just one. A blurry, shaky video shot by a passenger sitting near Gate 27 had already made it onto social media. In the caption, it read, "Girl in MIT hoodie just got cuffed for trying to board first class. She said her dad was the CEO. WTH is going on at LAX." That post traveled fast. Too fast. It hit the feed of Maya, an executive assistant at Liberty Wings Air HQ in Seattle. She had been working with Ethan Jackson, the CEO, for the better part of 7 years. She knew his schedule, his moods, his pressure points, and she knew one thing for sure. His daughter, Arielle, was supposed to be flying to Boston today, on Flight 308. She didn't hesitate. She forwarded the video with a simple caption. "Sir, please see this immediately. Is this Arielle?" Ethan didn't reply. Not with a text. Not with an emoji. He stood up from his meeting without a word, grabbed his suit jacket off the back of the conference room chair, and walked out. No explanations. No phone calls. Just silence. The next time anyone saw him, he was stepping off a Liberty Wings private jet at LAX Executive Terminal, less than 90 minutes later. He didn't waste time with protocols or PR handlers. No security detail. No driver. Just Ethan, storm walking. His shoes hit the tile in long, echoing strides. Employees in Navy Liberty uniforms turned and froze. Some nodded. Others whispered. They all recognized him. And none of them had ever seen him like this. His face was stone. Not angry. Not yelling. Just sharp. Focused. Like a storm cell gathering force behind his eyes. He didn't need a badge to access Gate 27. He was the badge. When he arrived, the gate was oddly quiet. The flight had been delayed. People sat slouched in chairs, checking phones, glancing at the commotion unfolding in the far corner of the terminal. That's where he saw her. His daughter. Cuffed to a chair. Her face turned away, her eyes puffy. Her hoodie rumpled. Her backpack dumped out beside her like trash. Her MIT journal bent, pages curling at the edges. Next to her stood the two security officers. Stiff, upright, eyes darting between each other like they just realized they'd made a mistake the size of an asteroid. And behind the counter, arms folded, watching with satisfaction, was Karen W. She didn't recognize Ethan Jackson at first. Not out of ignorance. Out of arrogance. She didn't expect someone like him to walk up the concourse like any other passenger. No entourage. No announcement. No spotlight. But when he stepped forward, when his voice finally cut through the hum of overhead announcements, everything stopped. "Take those handcuffs off my daughter." 5 words. Precise. Deadly. Karen's face drained of color in less than a second. She turned slowly, and when her eyes met his, it was like a punch to the chest. "Sir, I didn't know." Ethan didn't even look at her. He walked directly to Arielle. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. "Dad, I'm here," he said. "You're okay." He dropped to one knee. His suit didn't matter. His image didn't matter. He gently placed his hand over hers, still locked behind her back. "Unlock her," he said to the officers, not looking away from Arielle. The male officer stuttered. We were just following protocol. We were told." "I don't care what you were told." His voice didn't rise, but the temperature dropped 10 degrees. "You had her name, her ID. You had no probable cause, no due diligence. And yet you put your hands on my daughter, in front of dozens of witnesses, without a single phone call." A silence fell that swallowed every footstep, every airport murmur. The handcuffs came off. Arielle collapsed into her father's arms. Not from exhaustion. From release. From the moment her dignity came rushing back like breath after a deep dive. Ethan stood up slowly, one arm still around her shoulder. Then, finally, he turned to Karen. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just looked her dead in the eyes and said, "You just laid hands on the wrong girl." And somewhere deep in Karen's chest, her stomach dropped, because she knew the flight may have been delayed, but her career, it had just been grounded permanently. The video didn't just go viral. It went nuclear. By the time Ethan and Arielle were escorted to a private lounge near the executive terminal, the clip had already passed 250,000 views. By the end of the hour, it was trending on Twitter with the hashtag #SheBelongsInFirstClass. The clip was barely 30 seconds long, grainy and full of background noise, but it didn't need to be polished. It showed Arielle, hands cuffed, eyes wide, body shaking, begging for them to call her father. And it showed the name on the gate behind her, Liberty Wings Air. Someone had added bold white text across the top of the video. The CEO's daughter. Wrongfully cuffed. What happens to the rest of us? That line hit harder than any news anchor ever could. Within hours, cable news channels were looping the footage non-stop. Legal experts chimed in. Civil rights lawyers were on talk shows. Think pieces flooded the internet. And in the center of the storm sat Karen W., the gate agent who, for 15 years, had operated in a bubble of quiet authority. That bubble? It had popped. Hard. At 4:12 p.m., Ethan sat across from Eleanor Vance, Liberty Wings Senior VP of Operations. She had flown in from Chicago the moment she saw the clip. Her tablet buzzed every few seconds. Stockholders were already asking questions. Corporate sponsors were calling. Journalists were demanding statements. "Ethan," she said, setting the device down, "we're not looking at a PR issue. We're looking at a structural failure." He didn't nod, didn't blink. He just looked at Arielle, who sat quietly beside him, knees pulled to her chest, staring blankly at the untouched bottle of water on the table. "This wasn't just a rogue employee," Ethan said quietly. "This was a culture problem. We trained them to be efficient, not human." Eleanor sighed. "We pulled her employee file. Karen had 3 prior complaints for racial profiling, all dismissed at the supervisor level." "Dismissed," Ethan repeated. The word tasted like rust in his mouth. Eleanor leaned forward. "Do you want us to handle this the usual way?" "No." He shook his head. "No more quiet terminations. No more HR spin. I want her walked out today. Badge revoked. Access shut down. She'll lawyer up. Let her." He turned to his assistant, Maya, who had joined them quietly in the corner of the lounge. "Get me a meeting with the entire executive board. Tonight. Emergency session." Maya nodded. "And one more thing," Ethan added, his voice low but unwavering. "I want every single manager in this company to watch that video. And I want them to ask themselves, what if that were my daughter?" He didn't say it for drama. He said it because it was real. Because for once, privilege hadn't protected someone. And if his daughter could be dragged across an airport in handcuffs for daring to sit in first class, what chance did anyone else have? The next morning, Karen Whitfield woke up to her own name trending, again. But this time, it wasn't a promotion. It wasn't a congratulatory email from HR or a thank you message from the regional manager. This was different. The first email in her inbox was from the company's legal department. Subject: Notice of immediate administrative leave, Liberty Wings Air. The second was worse. Asterisk, termination pending investigation. Return your badge. Do not enter airport grounds. She stared at the screen, mouth dry, heart thudding against her ribs like it wanted out. On the television in her living room, the morning news was running a panel about workplace discrimination. Her face appeared on screen, freeze-framed mid-sentence, eyebrows raised, eyes squinting with suspicion at Arielle. She looked like a villain in a true crime documentary. Even the anchor's voice was somber. Karen Whitfield, a 15-year veteran gate agent for Liberty Wings Air, is now at the center of a nationwide debate on race, class, and authority. Her employer has launched an internal investigation. Civil rights groups are calling for further legal action. She fumbled for the remote and muted the TV. But the silence didn't help. Because now, Her phone was ringing. And ringing. And ringing. The group chats she once ruled, other supervisors, a few loyal co-workers, even old high school friends, were now ghost towns. Some people left the chat entirely. A few sent short texts, "Don't take this personally, but we can't be associated with this." Then came the knock. A courier. She opened the door and signed for a sealed envelope, hands shaking. Inside, her official termination letter. Cold, clinical, final. But it was the second page that made her knees buckle. Liberty Wings was seeking indemnity. Their lawyers were pursuing civil action for brand damage and reputational harm. They were exploring options to hold her personally liable for a portion of the financial fallout. She dropped the letter onto the kitchen floor like it burned her. She had always believed she was protected. 15 years on the job. Perfect attendance. A clean record, at least on paper. She was the one who knew all the policies, could quote them from memory, could recite protocol backward if needed. But now, none of that mattered. Because this time, her judgment call wasn't just wrong, it was filmed. She paced the house, desperate to reclaim a narrative that was slipping through her fingers. She told herself she didn't mean for it to go that far. That she wasn't racist. That Arielle looked suspicious. Not because of her race, but because of her clothes. But no matter how she spun it, the truth wouldn't budge. A young black girl had been humiliated. In public. For simply existing in a place Karen didn't think she belonged. And now, that gate was closed. Not just for Arielle. For her. Karen scrolled through her social media, where once she shared vacation photos and inspirational quotes. Her latest profile picture was now screenshot across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, underneath captions like, "She saw a criminal. The world saw a future engineer." This is what modern racism looks like: polite, procedural, and devastating. She threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a dull thud and cracked. She couldn't hear the pings anymore. But the noise wasn't going anywhere. Because once the internet decides who you are, you don't get to rewrite the story. The day after the incident, Arielle Jackson woke up in a different world. She hadn't slept much. Her body was sore, and her mind kept playing it all back like a loop on a broken screen. The cuffs, the stares, the smirk on Karen's face, the sound of her journal hitting the ground. She sat in the back seat of her dad's car as they pulled into a quiet driveway near the Liberty Wings executive air hangar. No press. No cameras. Just silence. Ethan had arranged a private flight to Boston. But before she boarded, he turned to her. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked softly. Arielle looked at him, eyes still red, but steady. "I'm not gonna hide," she said. "They already tried to take something from me. I'm not letting them take MIT too." He nodded, pride flickering behind the pain in his expression. Before she stepped on the plane, she checked her phone. There were thousands of messages. Her name was everywhere. On news sites, on podcasts, on TikTok. Celebrities had reposted the video. Politicians had tweeted support. Civil rights leaders were calling for policy changes. But Arielle? She posted just one thing. A photo of her worn-out hoodie with the MIT logo, lying across the chair beside her. "This is what I was wearing when they said I didn't belong in first class. I belong. So do you." At Arielle Jackson. It went viral in under 10 minutes. When she arrived in Boston, the welcome was unexpected. She expected whispers, awkward glances, maybe even pity. What she got was applause. The moment she stepped into the MIT Summer Program Orientation Hall, students from across the country stood and clapped. Some even hugged her. Others held up handmade signs that said things like, "First class brain," "First class seat," "Justice for Arielle." It wasn't about fame. It was about being seen. About knowing the world hadn't ignored what happened. That night, in her dorm room, she opened her journal. Some of the pages were still wrinkled from the fall. One corner was smudged from where her tears had landed the day before. But the sketches? They were still there. Her ideas. Her passion. Her future. She picked up a pen and started drawing. But this time, it wasn't a drone. It was a symbol. 2 wings, one large, one small, connected at the center, rising from a fractured surface. Beneath it, she wrote a single word: ascend. A week later, her father called her from Seattle. "I want to start something," he said. "Not for PR. For real change. I want it to be yours." And with that, the Ascend Initiative was born. A non-profit foundation funded by Liberty Wings and private donors, dedicated to giving scholarships and mentorship to students of color pursuing careers in aerospace, aviation, and engineering. Arielle became its first ambassador. She gave interviews, soft-spoken but powerful. She stood on stages and told her story, not to shame, but to shine. She spoke about implicit bias, about systems that see color before they see credentials, and about how resilience isn't born in silence, but in resistance. And the symbol she designed? It became the official logo of the foundation. It was printed on hats, backpacks, conference banners, even on the tail fin of a Liberty Wings training jet. People stopped seeing Arielle as a victim. They started seeing her for who she really was. A builder, a flyer, a force. And quietly, piece by piece, she began to heal, not just from the moment at Gate 27, but from the invisible wounds she'd carried far longer. Because when someone tries to keep you grounded, the greatest revenge is learning how to soar. It was a little after midnight. Arielle was driving home from a speaking event in Santa Clara, where she delivered the keynote at a National Youth Engineering Summit. Her words had been shared on CSPAN. Her photo was featured in Forbes. Her inbox was full of internship offers and scholarship invites she didn't even apply for. But right now, she was just tired. She pulled off I-5 into a small exit somewhere outside of Bakersfield, needing caffeine to finish the last 2 hours of the drive. The gas station was half lit, buzzing under old fluorescent tubes, with a slushy machine whirring in the background. Inside, it was quiet. A single figure stood behind the counter. Older, shoulders slightly slouched, hair dull brown with gray peeking out at the roots. The red vest with the store's logo didn't quite fit right. Arielle didn't notice her at first. She grabbed a bottle of cold brew from the back cooler, paid in cash, just something quick. She was wearing an MIT hoodie, a ball cap low over her curls, and earbuds in, halfway through a podcast about electric aviation. But the woman behind the counter? She noticed her immediately. Her hands shook as she rang up the bottle. The name on her tag said, Catherine N. But that wasn't her real name. Not the one that had made headlines. Not the one that had followed her like a shadow. It was Karen Whitfield. Once, she'd had a corner office in the terminal. Once, she'd been respected. Feared, even. Now, she worked graveyard shifts, earning just above minimum wage, clocking out when the sun came up, and sleeping through the day in a run-down apartment off the highway. She had lost everything. Her job, her pension, her marriage, her reputation. And here, standing in front of her, without recognition, without fanfare, was the girl she'd tried to reduce to a problem. Arielle smiled faintly. "Just this, thanks," she said, handing her a $5 bill. Karen didn't answer. She handed the change back with trembling fingers, eyes never rising above the counter. Arielle glanced at her. She paused. There was something in the woman's face, something familiar, like a ghost glimpsed through fog, but she couldn't place it. She tucked the change in the tip jar anyway and nodded once before stepping out. The door jingled softly behind her. Karen stood there, frozen. Arielle had walked away. No confrontation. No recognition. No revenge. Just gone. And for Karen, that was the hardest part. She had played judge and jury years ago, thinking she could decide someone's worth with a single glance. But now, she wasn't even a memory. She was no longer the villain in someone's origin story. She was just another cashier on a night shift, ringing up energy drinks and microwave burritos. Forgotten. Invisible. And that hurt more than any lawsuit ever could. 2 months later, Arielle stood on the tarmac of a small executive airport just outside Seattle. The morning was crisp, the sky a clear, cloudless blue, the kind of sky you only see in the Pacific Northwest after the rain clears out and the world feels freshly washed. Beside her was a sleek, white and silver private jet. Not massive, not flashy, but beautiful. On the tail fin, in bold, elegant lettering, sat the name, the Arielle J. Her father had surprised her with it after her keynote in D.C., not as a gift, as a statement, because the aircraft wasn't just for personal use. It was part of the Ascend Initiative's new outreach fleet, meant to fly mentors and students to programs across the country. The logo she had drawn, 2 wings, one lifting the other, was now painted just beneath the cockpit window, and today, it was taking off with its first official flight. A group of teen girls from underserved schools in Detroit, Dallas, and Stockton stepped onto the tarmac, eyes wide, necks craned. For most, this was their first time seeing a jet up close, let alone flying in one. Arielle stood at the base of the stairs to greet them. They weren't just future engineers or pilots or scientists. They were dreamers, just like she had been. Except this time, nobody would question their place in the seat. This time, they boarded with pride. And as the last girl stepped inside, Arielle paused. She looked out at the runway stretching before her. Wide, open, endless. It reminded her of something her dad had told her years ago, back when she was just starting to sketch wings in the margins of her notebooks. Runways aren't for stopping, baby girl. They're built for takeoff. And now, it was her turn to fly. But this time, she wasn't flying away from anything. She was flying toward something bigger. And the sky. It was finally hers. You see, this story was never just about a boarding pass. It wasn't just about race, or class, or power. It was about assumption, the quiet, casual kind that slips through cracks, wears a badge, smiles at your face, and still decides you don't belong. It was about what happens when someone in a position of small power uses it to deliver big harm. But more than that, it was about how we respond. Arielle could have stayed angry. She had every right to. She could have buried herself in silence or built a wall of bitterness so high that no sunlight ever got through again. But she didn't. She chose to speak. She chose to build. She chose to rise, not just for herself, but for others who wouldn't get the second chance she did. And that matters, because most stories like hers, they never make the news. They don't go viral. There's no CEO father rushing down a terminal. There's no viral hashtag or nationwide outcry. Most stories like hers vanish into apology emails and under review forms and it's just policy excuses. But this one lit a spark. It reminded us that prejudice doesn't always show up wearing hoods or shouting slurs. Sometimes it wears a uniform. Sometimes it holds a clipboard. Sometimes it asks for your ID with a smile, then rips your dignity from your hands. So let this story stay with you. Let it sit in your gut the next time you're behind a counter, or in a position to judge, or staring down someone who doesn't look like they belong. Because in that moment, you have a choice, to guard the gate, or open the sky. Arielle's story ended in the sky. But for so many others, it ends in silence. In a back room where no cameras are rolling. In a whispered apology that never reaches the public. In a file marked, closed. We like to believe that injustice announces itself loudly, that it shows up with red flags and warning signs. But more often, it doesn't. It hides behind policy. It masks itself with professionalism. It plays polite until someone dares to question it. And when they do, it calls for backup. That's why stories like Arielle's matter. Because they don't just spotlight the injustice. They spotlight the opportunity to intervene, to speak up, to record, to ask, "Are you okay?" To say, "I saw what happened and it wasn't right." You don't have to be a CEO to make a difference. You don't need millions of followers or a trending hashtag. You just need a voice. And the courage to use it when it counts. Because injustice only survives when good people stay quiet. So the next time you see someone being profiled, dismissed, or pushed aside, remember what you saw here. Remember Arielle. And remember that silence is a choice. And so is action. Because every single day, we're standing at gates, literal and figurative. And we're either building walls, or we're opening doors. The question is, which one will you do? Stories like this don't just end when the screen fades to black. They stay with us. In quiet moments. In subtle thoughts. In the little choices we make when nobody's watching. Arielle's story wasn't just about injustice. It was about what you do after injustice knocks you down. It was about how you pick up what's left of your dignity, dust it off, and turn it into a launch pad. She didn't become a voice because she wanted attention. She became one because the silence was too loud. And somewhere along the way, she realized something most people never do. That power doesn't come from your last name, or your job title, or what seat you're assigned on a plane. It comes from how you treat the person next to you. That's the real legacy. And that's what we're left with now. Not just her pain, but her purpose. Because Arielle didn't just rise. She reached back and pulled others up with her. She used her platform not to settle a score, but to build a bridge. To turn her moment of humiliation into a movement of opportunity. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. You don't need to wear a cape to make change. You just need to show up with empathy. To hold space for people who don't look like you, sound like you, or come from where you come from. To speak up when it's uncomfortable. To listen when it's not about you. To lead, not with noise, but with presence. Because at the end of the day, it's not about whether you've ever sat in first class. It's about whether you've ever stood up for what's right. So as you go back to your day, whether you're commuting, walking your dog, or scrolling late into the night, just remember this. Someone around you is fighting a battle you can't see. Don't be the gate that stops them. Be the runway that lifts them. Because that's what the world needs right now. Not more judgment, but more space to fly.